Okay, 47 is necessary. So in other words, 47 is a necessary tautology, and given the definition of a material conditional, since all necessary propositions are true, any material conditional with 47 as the consequent is true. Hence 48 entails 47. And given 18, 19, and 20, it follows that 48 also entails 47 and 48. So his argument B can simply be reduced to 48, God exists, 48, God exists. Because you can simply it's just a different way of asserting the conclusion. If the premises entail the conclusion, and the conclusion entails the premises, then the premises entail the premises. Or in other words, if the conclusion entails the premises, and the premises entail the conclusion, then the conclusion entails the conclusion. It's just a different way of asserting the conclusion right there. You're just tacking on a trivial contradiction there, and of course it's trivially true that all tautologies are true, and since premises and conclusion entail each other, we have the makings of a purely circular argument here. Okay, so needless to say, argument B isn't exactly persuasive. The only reason 46 is true is because 48 is true. Hence 48 simply justifies itself, resulting in a question-begging argument. And argument A does not differ in this respect, and this can be demonstrated easily. Okay, I've already demonstrated similar entailments in argument A, which already suffice. So this is just kind of to bring in the point more, to just just show how bad the problem really is here of question begging. In modal logic, proposition is necessary if and only if its negation entails a contradiction. In other words, it's entailed by a tautology. So necessary propositions P are such that 21, not Q and not Q, entails P. If it's false that a proposition Q is both true and false, then the proposition P is true. And this is logically equivalent, modus tollens, to 22. Not P implies Q and not Q. If a proposition P is false, then a proposition Q is both true and false. Now, given 20 and 21, we have 23. Okay. P implies not Q and Q. I'm sorry, not Q and not Q. A proposition P is true if and only if it's false that a proposition Q is both true and false. Okay. And in argument A, 24 was the case. G implies not Q and not Q. Maximal excellence is exemplified if and only if it's false that a proposition Q is both true and false. Okay? Because recall, for instance, that what we have here is basically the assertion of the necessity of G. Alright? And of course that simply reduces to 24. Alright? And unless Plantinga can give good reason for accepting 24, this argument is purely question-begging, and can simply be reduced to the assertion maximal excellence is exemplified. And this becomes clearer if we examine the situation. It's also a theorem propositional logic to 25. P implies Q if and only if not P v Q. In other words, a proposition Q implies proposition P implies Q if and only if either P or Q. Okay. Which is to say that a material conditional of P implies Q is logically equivalent to the disjunction not P or Q. Okay, and this can be seen easily once you do the truth tables for both. The truth tables are identical, hence they're logically equivalent. And of course, you can understand this better through modus tollens and modus ponens. P implies Q, P, Q. So if P implies Q and P, then therefore Q. Alright, and the same thing with not P v Q. If P, not P v Q, P, therefore Q. Alright, and also in the same case, if P implies Q, not Q, therefore not P. And in the same case with not P v Q, not Q, therefore not P. So the disjunctive syllogism here and the material conditional here are logically equivalent. So given this logical equivalence, argument A can simply be expressed like this. 26. G v Q and not Q. 27. Not Q and not Q. 28. G. In other words, either maximal excellence is exemplified, or a proposition Q is both true and false. 27. A proposition Q is both true and false. It's false that a proposition Q is both true and false. 28, maximal excellence is exemplified. In other words, a disjunctive syllogism. Now, obviously, 26 and 27 entail 28. But 28 entails 26 as well as 27 in the exact same way that argument B does. Therefore, we can simply reduce, as we reduced argument B, argument A to 28G. In other words, maximal excellence is exemplified, therefore maximal excellence is exemplified. And like argument B, this is hardly persuasive since it's question-begging. It justifies itself. The conclusion entails the premises, and the premises entail the conclusion, therefore the conclusion simply entails the conclusion. Alright, so argument A is purely question-begging. So, in the end, we just have to ask why we should accept 9, 11, or 26 at all. We simply attached a trivial contradiction onto the conclusion, then reason to the conclusion. Both the conclusion and the premises entail each other, therefore the argument simply reduces to an assertion of the conclusion. Hence, Plantinga's argument to this effect is purely question-begging. This is the same sort of criticism that Richard Gale gave, although to somewhat more detail. And what's interesting to note is that Plantinga sorta agrees with this criticism. As he says in The Nature of Necessity, not in The Nature of Necessity, in God, Freedom, and Evil, or as I'm quoting from the Philosophy of Religion Selected Readings by Michael Peterson, William Hasker, Bruce Reichenbach, and David Bassinger, from pages, second edition, from pages 181 to 83, he says the following. Wait, hold on. Did I lose my... I'm sorry, 182 to 183. What he says here is, but here we must be careful. We must ask whether this argument is a successful piece of natural theology, whether it proves the existence of God. And the answer must be, I think, that it does not. An argument for the existence of God may be sound, after all, without in any useful sense proving God's existence. Since I believe in God, the following argument is sound. Either God exists or 7 plus 5 equals 14. It's false that 7 plus 5 equals 14. Therefore God exists. But obviously this isn't a proof. No one who didn't already accept the conclusion would accept the first premise. The ontological argument we've been examining isn't just like this one, of course, but it must be conceded not everyone who understands and reflects on a central premise, that the existence of a maximally great being is possible, will accept it. Still, it is evident, I think, that there is nothing contrary to reason or irrational in accepting this premise. What I claim for this argument, therefore, is that it establishes not the truth of theism, but its rational acceptability, and hence it accomplishes at least one of the aims of the tradition of natural theology. And as I mentioned in my blog, his comments here are somewhat baffling, because like argument B, you're wondering how argument A fares any better at all. It's been shown that A is purely question-begging. Necessity isn't simply granted by fiat. And as I'll show soon, in other words later, these type of objections, the type of reasoning that Plantinga is engaging in here, would really just go ahead and prove a literal infinity of objects, from objects as plain and seemingly innocent as horses to literally anything whatsoever. So as I'm going to detail here, there's basically no good reason to accept the central premises of Plantinga's argument. So let's turn to section 4. Why accept maximal greatness? Now, as I mentioned in section 3, the crucial premise of Plantinga's argument is either 9 or 11. It doesn't matter which one you mention, because they're logically equivalent. So the question arises, why accept God's necessity? Plantinga's said over and over that there's no evidence against the possibility of maximal greatness. So it seems that he's under the modus operandi with respect to modality. That's interesting. A modal modus operandi. MMO. Interesting. That modal claims are innocent until proven guilty. That is, unless you can show something to be truly incoherent, it's possible. Okay? So it's totally possible. But you wonder how an approach like that would consistently apply to necessity. Now recall the proposition is necessary if and only if its negation is possible. In other words, its negation entails a contradiction. If you were to consistently apply the maxim, modal propositions are innocent until proven guilty, one ought to inquire with respect